Good morning and welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Poppy Harlow.
And I'm Jim Sciutto. We are following breaking news this hour, concerning news. Buckingham Palace says that Queen Elizabeth is now under medical supervision because doctors are concerned for her health. A royal source tells CNN that immediate family members of the 96-year-old monarch have been informed. All of the Queen's children, including Prince Charles, the heir, as well as grandsons, Prince William and Prince Harry, are traveling to Balmoral Castle in Scotland to be with the Queen.
So let's begin this morning with this breaking news out of the United Kingdom. Buckingham Palace with a statement saying that the Queen's doctors are concerned for her health and are recommending that she remain under medical supervision.
CNN's Mac Foster, he's following this from London. CNN Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta with us. Also CNN reporter Anna Stewart outside Buckingham Palace. Max, first to you. You've been chronicling throughout the last hour the steps being taken that raise the level of concern right now that this could be grave. That the children, of course, traveling to the palace, family members, also notes being passed to the Conservative and Labour leaders in Parliament. Tell us what we know at this stage about the Queen's health.
Well, the level of concern has really been rising throughout the day, as you point out. So there were rumours this morning. There was concern last night that the Queen had cancelled a virtual meeting with the crucial Privy Council to swear in the new Prime Minister, a core constitutional duty, but she couldn't even carry out that by Zoom from Balmoral Castle. So some concern there. And then we had the trickle of news today. So first of all, a text to me saying that the Queen's doctors were concerned about the Queen's health, which is very stark language from the palace. And that is something we never get. They never really talk about her medical condition, and to voluntarily come out with that and to say that they're concerned was worrying. Then we had a tweet from the Prime Minister, a very public statement really, acknowledging the Queen's health. Also, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most senior member of the Queen's Church, saying he was praying for her. And then we had this series of announcements from different parts of the family announcing, as you say, that all the Queen's children are heading to Balmoral if they're not already there. Prince William on his way there as well, not with the rest of his family because they're just starting school. And we've just heard that Prince Harry and the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan, are also both heading to Balmoral. And that perhaps is particularly telling, because we don't see the Sussexes with the rest of the family at the moment. In fact, they've been here for a few days and they have deliberately stayed out of the family's way, but they are putting all those differences behind them, heading to Balmoral for what is clearly a very central family moment. Everyone dropping their plans, heading to Balmoral to be by the Queen's side. It is a grave situation.
Max, of course, she is the longest serving monarch in Britain's history, and the royal family is typically very quiet about her health, but to get this statement and then also to get the subsequent statement from the Prime Minister and also really from all the prongs, I just wonder how different it is in your view this time, given how closely you have reported. This has been your beat for so many years. How is it different this time?
Well, the thing that's different is they're not waving us away from being in rolling coverage. They know what we're doing and they're not telling us not to do it. All the UK networks as well have also switched to rolling coverage. BBC One, which is the public broadcaster's flagship network, has cancelled all of its programming. It has put on rolling news coverage as well. The palace wouldn't allow that to happen if they felt it was over-egging the situation. Always in the past, when there have been rumours, they've been very quick to send me a text to say calm it down, and we do that because it shows that the situation isn't as serious as they say. There's always optics involved here because they do feel that the Queen has a right to medical privacy like anyone else. They also understand that the public has a right to updates, major updates on the state of her health, so they are allowing the public to be informed by what we are interpreting as a very major event, and that just really shows the gravity of the situation.
It was only 3 months ago, and we were just showing pictures there, that the Queen and the family celebrated her Platinum Jubilee weekend, including events at Buckingham Palace. We also have Sanjay Gupta with us. Sanjay, you've been following this closely. The statement says, following further evaluation, there is now concern. I've seen some doctors note that the fact that she's not in the hospital, that she remains at home, could be telling. And again, it's hard for you and anyone from a great distance. You're not there, but tell us what signs you're watching right now this morning.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a very critical point here. The idea that she's not in the hospital. If you look at some of the previous medical history of the Queen, we know, as was just pointed out, she did go to the hospital in October of 2021. It was not clear what exactly was done at that point, but point is that they did take her to the hospital. At this point, we're hearing obviously that whatever it is that's causing this, and we don't know, that would be speculation, it's pretty significant, and at the same time reconciling that with the idea that she's not going to the hospital. Why doesn't someone go to the hospital? Either because they don't need it, they're not that sick, or they don't think there would be any benefit from going to the hospital at this point. So I think you're absolutely right, Jim, that is sort of one of those things that I think most people sort of in the medical world pay attention to. She obviously can get very good care and medical supervision. She is the Queen without going to the hospital, but if things were required in terms of breathing, in terms of sustaining blood pressure, typically that is something that would be done at the hospital. So it's speculative at this point, but all the other signals sort of point to that this is, there's obviously a lot of concern here.
And Anna, you are at Buckingham Palace. What is the sense there? How has this message from the palace changed also in just the past few days?
Well, and also just in the past hour, I would say, picking up on what Max was saying, here at Buckingham Palace, it is really busy. You can see camera positions being lined up, lots of people, lots of activity, lots of very worried faces. And I would say that normally the palace steers us away from what can be a bit of hysteria in the UK media about the Queen's health, given she is 96 years old. Given we know that she has episodic mobility issues, and there have been many health issues since she spent a night in hospital in October of last year, so nearly a year ago. But generally the palace steers us away from covering. Right now we're in rolling coverage across all the UK outlets, and there is so much concern. I think we should go back to the statement that the palace first released, which of course caused all this concern, with the doctors saying they recommend she remain under medical supervision and saying the Queen remains comfortable and at Balmoral. Add to that the fact we now know, within minutes of that statement being released, that all of the Queen's children, including Prince William and Prince Harry, are all now travelling up to Balmoral to be with her. So that is where the concern comes from. And when you put it into context of the last few days and consider that for the first time Her Majesty welcomed her 15th Prime Minister, which is quite an extraordinary fact, but not from Buckingham Palace here, where you would expect, but from Balmoral, and that was on the advice of doctors because she needed rest. So we saw Boris Johnson, the outgoing Prime Minister, and the incoming Prime Minister Liz Truss all travel up to Scotland for that. And then yesterday, for a Privy Council meeting, the Queen actually cancelled the Zoom meeting from Balmoral, again on the advice of doctors. So taking into context, taking into consideration everything we've heard in the past hour, I think there is reason to be very concerned about the Queen's health at this stage. Jim, Poppy?
Well, the pictures we have there on the screen are of the balcony of Buckingham Palace just in June of this year for that Jubilee celebration. But Max, if we can look at history just for a moment. In February, she became the first British monarch to serve 70 years on the throne, extending what was already a record for a British monarch. She is a bridge all the way back to World War II, right? When she and the royal family showed such strength during the war, during the Blitz of London. Place her, if you can, in British history here, and the meaning that she has in terms of leadership through all the years and decades to the British people.
Her first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill. Her 15th Prime Minister was Liz Truss. That speaks to so much of the Queen's reign. When she took the throne, she inherited a crumbling empire. Countries were seizing independence, leaving the British Empire, and that was seen as the death knell, really, for the British monarchy. What's quite extraordinary about the Queen, if you imagine her primary role is to leave the throne in a stronger state than she received it in, she has managed to do that over the course of her reign, which is extraordinary when you consider the idea of monarchy. It's not something I think the British people would vote for now, but it's also something that they won't let go of either, and it's, I think, in large part because of the Queen. And I think she represents continuity and stability, and she steps up and she steps onto the world stage when people expect to see her. So in moments of crisis, we look to her. There was a really significant moment, I think, during the pandemic when Boris Johnson's government was in a complete mess and falling apart and mishandling the whole situation. And the Queen stepped in and gave a public address referring back to the World War. And that was the moment, really, where the country came together and decided to really lock down and for the better of the nation. And that is a typical sort of example of what the Queen has managed to do. She is there for when the government fails, effectively. And I also think she rises above the monarchy even. She's a global figure, a living, historic global figure, and someone who I've travelled with around the world and is so revered in so many different parts of the world. And I can only put that down to the fact that she isn't a divisive figure, she isn't a political figure, and she's always managed to get people to endear her. I mean, when the Chinese premier was here, he was very keen to be seen in front of the cameras and the carriages, as was Vladimir Putin. I think Nelson Mandela described it his favourite state visit when he came to the UK. So she's always allowed the UK to punch well above its weight because of the way she's always handled herself.
It says so much,
Yeah.
Max. Yeah, it certainly does.
You know, when you look, Poppy, I was thinking at the pictures of her on the balcony in June, when she showed certainly more strength and fortitude, though still showing her age. But the picture just more recently of meeting with the new British Prime Minister,
Sure.
you see a change. Anna and Max have been covering this quite closely, and they will continue to stay with us here, as will Sanjay Gupta, as we follow the situation in the United Kingdom as the Queen's children. They're now traveling to Balmoral Castle in Scotland to be at the Queen's side after updates this morning that doctors have grown concerned with the state of her health. We're going to take you back there live.
We are continuing our breaking news coverage out of the United Kingdom. Buckingham Palace says the Queen's doctors are concerned for her health. They are recommending that she remain under medical supervision.
Her son, Prince Charles, has already arrived at Balmoral Castle. Her other three children on the way, as well as her grandsons, Princes William and Harry. It is hard to imagine a leader who has had such a mark, set such a mark over many decades as the monarch, the longest serving, in fact, in the history of the United Kingdom at more than 70 years. Our reporters and guests are back with us now. Max Foster, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, if we could begin with you, the Queen's health has been closely watched in recent months and years. She was tested positive for COVID, for the coronavirus earlier this year, got through that. Tell us about the points that have stood out to you in recent months regarding her health.
Well, you know, even if you go back to 2003, you know, this is when she was 77 years old. I mean, so just to give you some frame of reference in terms of her age, going back nearly 20 years, that's when she had, you know, operation on her knee at that point, and, you know, was part of the mobility issues that we still talk about today. But if you go forward now to March 2013, she was hospitalized at that point for gastroenteritis. She was 87 years old at that point, and that was, you know, 9 years ago. And then, as you point out, the more recent things, the COVID diagnosis in February of this year. But then if you look at 2021, 2022, you get an idea of sort of what she's been dealing with over this period of time. Skip some of the events at the Jubilee in June. There was always lots of information. She was hospitalized in October of 2021. We don't really know the particulars of that hospitalization, but that's really about it. She's 96 years old, so, you know, even going back 20 years, you're still talking about her being in her mid-70s at that point. I think when you read the statement today, you know, upon further evaluation, so there was evaluations that were already happening with the Queen. When they further evaluated her, there was enough concern. We don't know specifically what those concerns are, and probably cannot speculate on that. But it's telling, I think, more than anything, when you look in the past They would tell us if she had gone to the hospital, even if they didn't share a lot of details. At this point, there's no indication that she's gone to the hospital or going to the hospital, which can be read really of one of a few different ways. One hand, it could be favorable. Someone doesn't need to go to the hospital. They're not ill enough to warrant that, or they don't think the hospital would be of benefit at this point. That would be another way, an opposite way almost of reading that. So that's, it's really all speculation at this point. We know her age, we know her past medical history, and we have this statement.
Max, it's striking that, as Jim said, what a mark, 70 years as monarch. Someone who, when she was born, certainly did not expect to be queen, and yet she has met 14 U.S. presidents, 15 British prime ministers, 7 popes. And you talked about her as being this constant. I'm reminded of her former secretary, Simon Lewis, describing her once as constant as the North Star.
That's really, that is one of her duties, to represent continuity. So what she will do, and very cleverly, is remain in people's lives and be relevant to people. So she's seen as this very stable figure, a very sort of historic figure. Actually, she's an utter revolutionary. If you imagine, when she came to power, came to the throne rather, radio was the main form of media. She's the one that started doing the Christmas broadcasts on TV. So every year on Christmas Day, she would appear on TV in everyone's living rooms, and they would all sit in that really private moment with the Queen. Always, every year, the highest rated programme on British television is the Queen's broadcast. And that's a very clever way of getting to the heart of a family. She also popularised the walkabout, and this was something which was genius when you think about it. So when we were used to monarchs just arriving at a state event and going straight into the building, she did something which was quite unique, really. Was she would go to the public outside and she would talk to them. She would get the TV cameras in and she would show that, and that would be seen on TV, and you suddenly thought, oh, she's quite relatable, she talks to normal people. And that was quite an extraordinary thing to do, and she's always embraced the media all the way along. She was the first in her family to tweet. She was the first on Facebook. She remains relevant to people, even though we have nothing in common with her whatsoever. And that's one of the geniuses, really, to her longevity. She's remained relevant to people, and there's a deep emotional link that people have with her, because she will appear at a national moment of mourning and she will shed a tear, and we relate to that. During the London Olympics, which was a huge celebration, she was there cheering. She was there with Daniel Craig jumping out of a helicopter, and that was something that we could relate to, and that was a fun part of her. So she never spoke, she spoke, but she never expressed an opinion. But we related to her, and someone very close to her a few years explained why we never see her smile, although that's not actually true. And he said, well, imagine she's looking at a horse and she is smiling. Then if you didn't really like horses, then you wouldn't relate to her. But if she's looking at a horse and you like horses, you think, oh, she likes horses. If you look at a horse and you don't like horses, you'd think that she doesn't like horses. So by not expressing any opinion, she was liked by everyone. And that's very clever. And that's where Prince Charles is slightly different.
We've been watching, as you've been speaking, Max, to live pictures outside Balmoral, where you can see police uniformed officers there putting out barriers at the gate, and a handful of people gathering there. Notably, it was in April just of last year, Max, that she lost her husband of, I believe, more than 74 years, Prince Philip. Again, another measure of, as you were describing there, continuity, and there's a picture of them together there, continuity through time and loss. She's experienced loss. Certainly, we just commemorated the 25th anniversary of the passing of Princess Diana.
So this was a very unique relationship. They were soulmates for sure. They were very close, and that picture really speaks to that. He was also her closest personal advisor in terms of her profession. He was the only person that didn't bow or curtsy to her. Even Prince Charles will bow to her, even, obviously all of the staff, her private secretary. he was the one person that would argue with her and answer back to her. And if there was ever a major constitutional question, she would always put it past him. She made the big decisions, and she bore that responsibility very heavily. But there was a slight deal there out in public. He would walk behind her and support her. Behind the scenes, and I saw this play out, he was very much in charge. So he was always at the head of the table at Christmas, for example, and he would make big family decisions, where the children went to school, what they would do in terms of properties, and he would run the estates, and big decisions. He'd bang heads together behind the scenes. After he retired, he stepped back a bit. So she did step up a bit there, and Prince Charles stepped up a bit there as well. But when he died, Prince Philip, I think we really all saw how she was weakened as a result of that. And I don't think it was just love. I think it was the loss of a professional partner that she needed to carry out her work.
Yeah. Her soulmate, as you said. Max, stay close as you get more reporting. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, you as well. We'll come back to you very soon. Thank you for all of that. We do have a lot ahead. We are continuing our coverage of the breaking news out of the United Kingdom. Buckingham Palace saying that the Queen's doctors are concerned for her health. They are recommending that she remain under medical supervision.
Her family, her children, her grandchildren now traveling to Balmoral Castle, where the Queen is, to be at her side. We're joined now by CNN Chief International Anchor Christiane Amanpour, who spent so many years in London covering so many moments of history in her life and the life of the UK under her reign. And it strikes me, Christiane, that really most of the, vast majority of people in the UK have only known her, Queen Elizabeth, as the head of state, as the monarch, the longest serving. Describe the moment.
That is exactly right. She's not just the longest serving British monarch, overtaking the previous longest serving, which was her ancestor, Queen Victoria. You know, she's celebrated, as you said, 70 years, her Platinum Jubilee this summer, this June. But she's the longest reigning monarch in the world, if you put aside a King Louis of France, who was 4 when he was put on the throne. She's been an active monarch for longer than anybody else in history. And, you know, you can say yes, but, etc., what? But really, it's been an incredible life of hard work, dedication, service, and duty. Those are all the words that sum up how she has conducted herself during this reign. And I honestly think it also spans the most dramatic moments of the 20th century and the 21st century. You know, it spans from the war. She became queen just after, the end of World War II, but had gone through her father's reign during the war and having to really, get out there and rally a nation. And remember, I sort of call her an accidental queen, because had it not been for her uncle, King Edward VIII, who abdicated for the love of an American woman, you remember, a divorcee, he was not allowed to stay king, but he insisted on marrying Wallis Simpson, and he had to abdicate. Well, her father, King George V, was then made king. And he really had to gather every bit of grit that he had, because he was a shy man. He was somebody who had a speech impediment, had to work on that for public speeches. But he then became a very beloved king, because he was considered to have been with the people during the worst of World War II. And you remember there was the London Blitz. There was, it was just awful in Great Britain during the war. And so the love for her, the respect for her, stems from then. And she and her sister put on their uniforms and went out. Remember, she was fixing cars and military trucks, and she always said, this is something I learned, and it was incredibly useful, getting her head under the bonnet, as we say here, the hood of these military vehicles. All the way through Y2K, the turn of the century, through the entire media revolution, through the collapse of an empire and a reassertion of what actually it meant to be British in the world, and through the whole social media. There's been downtimes. She was very unpopular in the immediate aftermath of Princess Diana's death, when Princess Diana's brother basically said in front of the Queen during that funeral that it was the family who hounded her to her death. It's been very, very difficult. You're looking at, there are pictures of her, of course, with all the American presidents. I think one of the most fun moment was when President Obama and Michelle Obama, First Lady, came to the UK, and Michelle Obama did what she does naturally, which is reach out and touch people. She has such a charisma, and the British press went into paroxysms. You don't touch the royal body. But the Queen let it be known via the statements that she was not offended in the slightest, and that she actually really liked Michelle Obama and enjoyed that visit. Then there was the Trump years and the Trump visit, which was somewhat different. But she's had an amazing, amazing time as the rallier of this nation.
Christian, you had something that most people, of course, almost no one gets. You had time with her, actually in person. In 2007, you were awarded the Commander of the Order of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II. This was at Buckingham Palace. I just wonder, as you reflect on this sort of remarkable life she has lived and continues to live, what we didn't see that you felt or saw.
Yeah, I was in her orbit a couple of times, once then and once when she had, of one of her jubilees, she had a series of cocktails, including one for the great unwashed masses of the press. And we all were invited up to Windsor Castle, and, there was a big hall, and it was just crowded, but the minute she entered that hall, it was as if, you could hear a pin drop. Everybody suddenly got silent. And then she wended her way through us, through the crowd. And she is remarkable. I mean, she was literally the queen of small talk. She could say anything to anybody. And no matter how banal it might have sounded, you were nonetheless thrilled that the royal gaze had been turned towards you. And I felt the same way when I received the honor from her, and was frankly tongue-tied.
Yeah.
Some of that royal charm as well. Christiane Amanpour, so good to have you. Remember, share so many of these memories, and we appreciate it. Of course, we continue to cover the news out of the UK, but we also have some sad news to report this morning here at the CNN family about a true CNN original. We have just confirmed that Bernie Shaw, this network's first anchor, has passed away at the age of 82. We're going to have a remembrance of him, his personality, his life, and his incredible work. That's coming up next.
We do have more breaking news this morning that hits home for us here at CNN. The network's first chief anchor, Bernard Shaw, has died. His family says that he passed away Wednesday of pneumonia, unrelated to COVID-19.
Shaw, Bernie, to many of us here, was 82 years old. He helped launch this network on June 1st, 1980, with the network for more than 20 years. Our Wolf Blitzer, who knew him very well, worked with him for many of those years, has a look back at his incredible life and career.
The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky.
It was a night that would make TV history. CNN anchor and veteran journalist Bernard Shaw reporting live from Baghdad. It was the start of the 1991 Gulf War.
Clearly, I've never been there, but this feels like we're in the center of hell.
Shaw, with colleagues John Holloman and Peter Arnett, broadcast the first war coverage in real time. The boys of Baghdad, as they became known, reported from the floor of their hotel room as bombs fell around them.
Oh, Baghdad, line's dead.
You really were scared for your life.
Yes, very much so. In war, one moment you're alive, the next moment you're dead.
Dire moments shared by 1 billion viewers around the globe and credited with turning CNN into the news leader it is today.
It reminded everybody of what journalism can be and what television can be. And it truly put CNN on the map, and Bernie was right at the heart of that story.
Shaw's remarkable career began in Hawaii. He was a Marine, determined to become a journalist, and sought out a meeting with TV news legend Walter Cronkite there on assignment.
Right away, he said, Mr. Cronkite, I have to talk to you. I have to be a journalist, and I have to find out how I do that.
Shaw returned to his native Chicago and got a job in radio. That led to an assignment covering Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
The one memorable thing he said to me was, one day you're going to make it, just do some good.
Eager to follow King's advice, Shaw once again turned to Cronkite, who helped him land a job at CBS. As a D.C. reporter, he covered the Watergate scandal before moving to ABC in 1977. He was one of the first journalists to capture the harrowing scene of the Jonestown Massacre. 2 years later, CNN came calling.
I'm Bernard Shaw. That's the latest from our Cable News Network Bureau here in Washington.
I mean, we started off, all the other guys had white males as their lead anchors, and our lead anchor was a team of a woman and a black man, so I thought it was real good.
I did too.
Less than a year on air, Shaw led the network's coverage of the assassination attempt on President Reagan.
Approximately 4 shots were fired at the president.
Bernie was Mr. Calm, Mr. Steady. He was never trying to get ahead of the story. He was not trying to say more than he knew. And frankly, that's what you want in a journalist.
6 years later, Shaw's brand of journalism won CNN the kind of White House access previously reserved for the big 3 networks.
5 of the Republican presidential candidates have deserted you. The conservatives, the right wing of your party, are after your scalp.
Shaw's reputation for hard interviews became legendary after a question to Michael Dukakis during a 1988 presidential debate.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
It was classic Bernie Shaw. It certainly was a moment when people took another look at Michael Dukakis and made a decision about him that no doubt had an impact ultimately on their vote.
A year later, Tiananmen Square. The Chinese government cracked down on news coverage, forcing Shaw off the air.
For all of the hardworking men and women of CNN, goodbye from Beijing. I'm a child of democracy. And when we were shut down, my temples just froze with anger. I remember that night I went back to my hotel room, and I actually cried.
For more than 20 years, Shaw was the face of CNN and trusted news around the world.
Always steady, always solid, always trusted, and that to me is going to be his legacy. It was the you can count on him brand.
But that public trust came with a personal cost. Shaw said he sacrificed precious time away from his wife and 2 children and suffered PTSD from his time in Baghdad.
You pay a price. I happen to believe it's a worthwhile price to pay, but you're going to pay a price.
It was the price of being a witness to history and the privilege of being trusted to report it.
You can depend on us being here all the time. And please, pass the word.
Wow.
What a remarkable life, Jim, and what an example of what CNN was and is, and may we all continue to learn from him.
No question. What a life, what a career, what a man, always a gentleman. That's how we knew him here. Our thoughts with his family today, and we'll be right back.